Hi, my name is Jasmine Reeves, and at my graduation dinner, my parents handed me a legal envelope, the same way people hand out birthday cards. Except inside wasn't a card. It was a formal disownment packet, signed, stamped, notarized, dated 2 weeks before I even walked the stage. My mother, Claudia, slid it across the table, like she was giving me jewelry. My sister, Miranda, lifted her phone, recording every second, for whatever sick entertainment she'd planned. No speech. No congratulations. Just 4 words. You're on your own. And the part that made me smile? They had no idea. I'd already built something that made their entire punishment look like a bad joke. Before I tell you what came next, comment your city, so I can say hi properly. Here on Echoes of Life, I didn't leave the restaurant right away. I just sat there, letting the weight of their little performance settle in my chest. Claudia kept smiling that tight, polished smile of hers, the one she used at charity galas, like humiliating your own daughter was a form of philanthropy. Miranda finally lowered her phone. Her only question was, "So, how does it feel to be officially cut off?" Her voice sugary, like she'd rehearsed the line in the car. I didn't answer. I just watched my father, Raymond, pour himself more wine, avoiding eye contact the way he always did, when he knew he'd chosen the easier cruelty. They spoke about it like it was discipline, like I was some spoiled child who needed tough love, even though they hadn't attended my ceremony, hadn't said congrats, hadn't asked what job I accepted, hadn't asked how I survived law school, on loans, consulting gigs, and 12-hour days. The funniest part? They truly believed this moment would break me, that without the family name, I'd crumble, beg, prove them right. But what hurt wasn't the disownment. It was realizing they'd planned it, signed the papers early, set the stage, reserved a luxury restaurant, just to make the betrayal look elegant. They hadn't come to celebrate me at all. They'd come to dispose of me. Politely, publicly, cleanly. The way you'd trim a branch you decided wasn't growing the way you wanted. And they still didn't know what I'd already built. The only thing they succeeded at that night was freeing me. I drove home from the restaurant without turning on the radio. Silence felt cleaner than anything they'd said. The envelope sat on the passenger seat, soft, thin, almost weightless. Funny how something that small could hold decades of history. When I got to my apartment, I didn't cry. Not because it didn't hurt. It did in the dull, familiar way of an old bruise. But because I'd already mourned them years ago. Their performance at Romanos wasn't new. It was just official. A ceremony for a decision they'd made long before. The truth was, my family had been rehearsing this moment since I was a teenager. Every ignored milestone. Every time they introduced Miranda as the one we're proud of, and me as the academic one, still figuring herself out. Every holiday where I somehow became the planner, the driver, the afterthought, while they posed for photos without me. I'd learned early, if you weren't useful to them, you were invisible, unless they needed a favor. Then suddenly I was our brilliant Jasmine again. So while they were busy calling me boring, awkward, a lost cause, I spent 3 years studying more than case law. I studied them, their spending patterns, their business choices, their trust structures, the way Claudia used charity events to hide insecurity, the way Raymond kept chasing the next big deal to avoid looking at his old failures. And Miranda, always hungry for a spotlight. She didn't know how to earn. But I also studied wealth. Real wealth. Quiet wealth. Protected wealth. The kind that doesn't need a last name or a country club to prove it exists. I took internships they mocked, consulted for startups they dismissed, drafted contracts at 2 a.m, built networks they didn't understand. And somewhere between my 2nd and 3rd year, I stopped wanting their approval, stopped needing their last name, stopped believing that DNA equaled loyalty. By the time they slid that disownment letter across the table, they weren't cutting ties. They were confirming what I'd already accepted. That night, under my cheap apartment lamp, looking at their signatures at the bottom of the page, I whispered something I had never said out loud before. You didn't lose a daughter. You lost access. Because while they were busy taking me out of their will, I was building something they couldn't touch. Not with guilt. Not with lawyers. Not with their version of love. If they'd looked a little closer that night, they might have noticed the real shift wasn't the paperwork. It was me, finally done being theirs. 3 years before that dinner, something cracked quietly inside me. It didn't happen at graduation or in a courtroom. It happened over turkey and cheap wine at Thanksgiving. My older sister, Miranda, had just announced her engagement to a wealthy tech heir. My mother, Claudia, was glowing like she'd won a promotion. My father poured more wine and called it a powerful alliance. I went to the kitchen for water, just to breathe. On the way back, I passed my father's study and heard my name. Not with pride, not with affection, just flat measuring tone, my father said, almost bored. Jasmine adds nothing to this family. Uncle Preston gave a short laugh behind his glass. She's a losing investment, he answered. My mother didn't argue with them. She embarrassed us at the Johnsons' gala, she said softly. She spent the night discussing tax law with their accountant. She'll never marry well. She doesn't understand her role. Their laughter slid through the half-closed door. 3 adults reviewing my life like a quarterly report. I froze in the hallway, fingers shaking around the water glass. In that moment, something old inside me finally stopped hoping. Then my father delivered the part that mattered. If she passes the bar, we cut her loose, he said. If she fails, we reconsider how much more to waste. No point funding someone who gives no real return. They clinked glasses after that. Decision made. Case closed. I walked upstairs without making a sound. From the outside, nothing changed that night. Inside, the entire landscape moved. By morning, I had made my own decision. I packed early, left before breakfast, and drove back to campus. The next day, at 7 a.m., I was in Professor Jennings' office. I need to learn everything, I told her. Trusts, estates, asset protection, real wealth mechanics. Not theory, reality. She watched me for a long moment. This is personal, she said quietly. Very, I answered. From then on, I lived a double education. One path for grades, clerkships, and a respectable resume. Another for survival, leverage, and complete independence. While they joked about me behind closed doors, I studied their world. I learned how families hide money and move assets safely. I learned how control can exist without any visible power. Most importantly, I learned how to stand alone on paper. When they slid that letter across the table at Romanos, I didn't flinch. They thought they were cutting their losses. They thought they were finally pushing me out. The truth was simpler. I had already walked away years before they signed anything. Their letter wasn't punishment. It was documentation. All it really proved was this: they never held my future. Graduation arrived 3 years later, exactly on their schedule. They skipped the ceremony without hesitation or apology. I had something better than their applause. By then, my double life was fully formed. By day, I clerked and interned like everyone else. By night, I reviewed contracts for tiny, desperate startups. I learned cap tables, vesting, and liquidation preferences quietly. During second year, I met 3 exhausted engineers downtown. They rented 2 desks in a noisy co-working space. Their product was brilliant security software with disastrous legal paperwork. Their company was called DataStream. They could not afford a big firm's hourly rates. So I offered something different and very specific. I would rebuild their entire legal structure from scratch. In return, I would take equity instead of cash. 2% seemed small, but I believed in them. They looked doubtful, but they were exhausted and cornered. They signed the engagement letter with shaking hands. I worked nights and weekends, sometimes sleeping at my desk. I rewrote incorporation documents and cleaned their chaotic cap table. I negotiated their seed round with investors twice my age. Then we closed a Series A on protective terms. 2 years later, Cybercore acquired DataStream for $800 million. My tiny stake became $24 million overnight. After taxes, my share landed near $18 million. No trust funds, no gifts, no family signatures anywhere. I moved everything into entities I controlled completely. Layered entities, quiet accounts, boring names and addresses everywhere. Nothing pointed back to Raymond and Claudia's disappointed daughter. So when I sat at Romanos holding that envelope, I was not broke or frightened or dependent. I was a fully funded exit plan in a simple dress. They slid disownment papers toward me like a punishment. To me, it read like a mutual release. After dinner, I drove back to my small apartment. I opened my laptop before touching their documents. An email waited from Morrison and Associates confirming my offer. I accepted, but only as a temporary stepping stone. Within a year, I met with Professor Jennings again. I told her I wanted to build our own firm. She brought reputation, experience, and courtroom presence. I brought capital, clients, and an obsessive work ethic. We signed a lease on a 20th floor office downtown. We ordered a glass door with both our names. While my parents bragged about teaching me independence, I engraved it instead. They believed cutting me off removed my safety net. Really, it removed their last illusion of control over me. By the time they came begging for help, I was nobody's dependent on paper or in practice. Their punishment was just paperwork. My response was an entire independent life. 3 years after that dinner at Romanos, their voices finally fell silent in my life. Not because things healed, because consequences finished what I never needed to start. Raymond lost the house he once bragged about. Claudia was quietly dropped from every charity board. Miranda's marriage dissolved faster than her excuses. The country club circle that once mocked me stopped taking their calls entirely. Meanwhile, my firm thrived. Clients waited weeks for an appointment. We hired 2 new associates before winter. Our Napa Vineyard deal closed without a single hiccup. My life expanded in ways they never imagined. One afternoon, I stood in my Pacific Heights penthouse. Sunlight spilled across floors I paid for. Peace filled corners they once filled with judgment. I poured myself tea, opened the window. Let the whole world feel quiet for the first time. That quiet was worth more than any inheritance. More than any apology they never gave. More than the approval I spent half my life chasing. I didn't need their name, or their trust, or their version of love with strings attached. I built something they could never take credit for. Something clean. Something entirely mine. And when the last legal notice was filed, the last blocked number silenced, the last family expectation removed, I finally saw the truth clearly. Sometimes the greatest inheritance is losing the people who never valued you. Sometimes the real freedom isn't revenge. It's peace that no one can touch. I closed my laptop, turned off the lights, and whispered to myself, I didn't escape them. I outgrew them. Like, share, and subscribe to Echoes of Life. Your next story arrives soon. And trust me, you don't want to miss it.